2024 has been a really good year for aftermarket wireless GameCube controllers. Back in October, 8BitDo released a DIY wireless controller PCB that lets you convert an OEM GameCube controller into a wireless Bluetooth controller. Alongside this mod kit, 8BitDo released the retro receiver for the GameCube that allows you to connect Bluetooth controllers to a real GameCube. But recently, Retrofighters released a Pro Series controller for the GameCube called the BattlerGC Pro, which is an upgraded version of their regular BattlerGC. This will be my first experience with any of the Retrofighters GameCube controllers, so I figured it was the perfect time to do a comparison between the 8BitDo mod kit and the BattlerGC Pro. This video is sponsored by PCBWay, but more on PCBWay later. First, let's take a look at the tech specs for the 8BitDo mod kit. So it is a Bluetooth controller, or it will enable an OEM controller to be a Bluetooth controller. It has new Hall effect joysticks, so these are replacements to the GameCube stock stick boxes to make them Hall effect sensors. It gets about 6 hours of playtime with its 300 milliamp hour built-in battery. And that's pretty much it for the tech specs, although one thing it doesn't mention is that Rumble is supported. I've already done an unboxing and installation of the mod kit during one of my live streams, which you can check out here, but I'll do a quick recap. Inside of the anti-static bag is the main controller PCB, a separate C-stick PCB, and a battery charge port connector. Another bag contains replacement stick caps for the thumbstick and the C-stick, a rumble motor cable, and a USB charging cable. Overall, the installation is pretty simple. Start by disassembling an OEM GameCube controller. Then, desolder the wires connected to the rumble motor. Lift up on the rumble motor bracket to loosen it. Then pull out the little trigger end stop PCBs. I actually had this clear GameCube controller shell from Foxpad Customs that I wanted to use for this project, so I had to move the buttons and button membranes from the old controller shell into the clear one. Next, we need to connect the charge port connector to the main controller PCB. Then, connect the C-stick PCB to the main PCB. Then we can put the PCB on top of the buttons and the membranes. Then, on top of that, we can replace the rumble motor bracket with the rumble motor still in it, making sure to slide the trigger end stop PCBs into place, with the conductive side facing outward. 8BitDo claims that this mod kit is solder free. You're supposed to cut the rumble motor wires and strip them, twist them together with the included rumble motor cable, and add heat shrink to keep it all together. I highly recommend actually soldering these wires and adding heat shrink to protect against shorts. Then plug the rumble motor cable into the PCB. You'll have to move the rumble motor wires out of the way so that the wires don't get pinched when the controller goes back together. I'm actually showing you the wrong place to put it here. It should go up more so that the wires don't cross these little white lines on the PCB. Then you can replace the Z button and screw the controller back together. Now let's go ahead and look at the Retrofighters BattlerGC Pro. On the back is a list of specs. It says Bluetooth and 2.4 GHz wireless technology, which is interesting. It has Hall effect analog sticks. It has vibration feedback, which is the rumble motor. It says added P1, P2 back buttons. I'm not really sure what that means. It has an accurate D-pad with integrated switches. It has a rechargeable LED battery. I think it just means it has an LED that lets you know when it's charging. And the battery seems to last for 10 plus hours, which is more than the 8BitDo kit. And it has a USB-C charging port. Okay, a lot of stuff fell out. It comes with a braided USB-C cable. Oh, in this little box is the 2.4 GHz receiver, I guess, and a USB receiver. And here's the controller itself. Interesting. I have some thoughts. Oh, look at that. It's a little pin. It's a pin of the controller. Neat. This is the first time I'm holding this controller. It's bigger than I thought it was going to be, and I have some other thoughts, but I guess I'll save that for the end. It has normal GameCube face buttons here, normal position for the C-stick and thumbstick, and the D-pad here. These LED indicators are for letting you know which switch controller you're paired to, as well as the other switch buttons, plus, minus, and home in the middle here. On the top, it looks like there's a pairing button and the USB-C port for charging, And I'm curious if that also lets you connect it to a computer with a USB cable. It has 2 Z buttons, so an R and an L. I'm not really sure if the L button activates Z when you press it or if it's its own independent button. Then there's the ZL and ZR. Oh, it has some clicky switches when you bottom out the shoulder buttons. That's interesting. On the back are the P1 and P2 buttons that you can press with your, I guess, I don't know, middle finger or something, one of your fingers on the back. And there is the Bluetooth / 2.4 gigahertz toggle, so you can change which mode it's in. And then there's another button here. Maybe that's the reset button. Not really sure what that button does. There is a little manual that comes with it. So let's see. 18 and 19 are reset, turn off. Okay, so there's, I think this button here turns the controller on and off, or at least off. Oh, this button here is not the pairing button. This is a screenshot button for the Switch. According to the manual here, the home button is used for pairing, I guess for Bluetooth mode. There's a whole bunch of instructions here for how to pair. So let's see, Switch or 2.4 gigahertz USB wireless. Oh, that's this dongle, I believe. Okay, if you're using the 2.4 gigahertz dongle here, holding the home button pairs it to this dongle. The home button also is used for pairing in Bluetooth mode as well. So I guess the home button is how you're gonna pair in either of the modes. Okay, so there's a lot of information about how to pair and customize the controller. So I highly recommend that you keep this manual, this little pamphlet, with you somewhere. Otherwise, you'll probably never remember all the different settings. Now I'd like to do some quick comparisons between a stock OEM GameCube controller, the 8BitDo Modkit, and the Retro Fighters BattlerGC Pro. So let's get a good baseline from a stock controller. This is pretty much a brand new controller. I have not used it very much. It's one of the Smash Brothers controllers, so everything is pretty much brand new. I really like the feeling of the thumbstick. It's very, crisp. It hasn't been used basically at all. The shoulder buttons are very snappy, I guess is the word. When they bottom out, they have this clicking sound. The Z button is not very tactile. It's kind of squishy. Okay, the face buttons. C-stick feels nice. I've always thought that the stock GameCube D-pad was kind of small, and it's kind of mushy as well. Okay, since the 8BitDo kit is based off of an OEM GameCube controller, most of those features are going to be the same. So basically the face button feel, the L and R buttons, not the Z button. The Z button is more tactile because it does use a different switch from the upgraded PCB. So it's a little more tactile. You can kind of hear it, whereas you couldn't hear an OEM controller. The D-pad is not really different. The C-stick is not really different, even though it is a Hall Effect stick box. Same thing with the thumbstick. I guess it's a little less springy too. This doesn't have as much tension as the stock thumbstick does. Some people might prefer that. It takes a little less pressure to move it around, but compared to the stock thumbstick, it's definitely easier to move this thumbstick around than the stock one. It's good to know that the 8BitDo Modkit should support the GameCube's analog trigger functionality because it does have a potentiometer and the end stop button as well. So it will support both the analog trigger functionality as well as the digital end stop. Okay, now for the Retro Fighters BattlerGC Pro. Like I said before, it's kind of wide. The face buttons sort of feel similar. This is using completely new button membrane, so it doesn't really feel exactly like a GameCube controller, like a stock GameCube controller. The C-stick is surprisingly even easier to use than the 8BitDo one here. And, it's a lot different than the OEM controller as far as how much pressure it takes to move it side to side. The C-stick is sort of similar, even though obviously these are going to be new Hall Effect sensors. The D-pad is completely different. It has clicky buttons for every position. Not really sure how I feel about that. It is a lot bigger, which I kind of like. The dual Z or L and R buttons are they're fine. I mean, they're slightly tactile. They're not really hard to press down or anything. The triggers, though, the L and R buttons, or in this case, the ZL and ZR buttons, are different. I don't know how to describe them. They don't really slide in and out. They're like normal triggers. From what I can gather, they should still support analog functionality, so we'll have to see about that. And when they bottom out, they have a tactile button click. Okay, I do have to say that I prefer the 8BitDo Modkit over the BattlerGC Pro, but let's take it into some games and see how they perform. The first game that I'd like to test with all these controllers is Super Mario Sunshine. I've gone ahead and skipped all the opening cinematics, and I'm here in the first level. I've played all the way to the first level here with the stock controller so that I can get a baseline of how the game feels. The first test I'd like to do is the tiptoe test. If you remember in the beginning of Super Mario 64, I was kind of tiptoeing around with Mario in the front of Peach's castle. So let's go ahead and see how much pressure it takes to walk Mario around. One thing that I'm noticing with the stock thumbstick is how it's kind of difficult actually to hold this really tiptoeing position because of the tension from the thumbstick. Like I said in the beginning, this is a stock thumbstick. It's pretty much brand new out of the box. It hasn't really been used that much. And because of that, it has a lot of tension. So I'm not really sure. Some people may not like that this is sort of difficult to press down. There's different levels of this tiptoeing. There's this very light tiptoeing you can do. I think that's about as slow as I can go. But then it kind of cranks up little by little, still tiptoeing. And then eventually Mario is going to start, he's kind of walking faster here. And then eventually he's in his normal walking stance. And then if I really crank it, then he's going to just run. The running animation is not even halfway through the thumbstick throw, which is kind of interesting. So there's really no benefit of going all the way down on the thumbstick. Okay, now that we have the tiptoe test out of the way, let's go ahead and get somewhere where we can use flood here. Okay, I found a little bit of goop. Now, the reason I wanted to use some of this goop on the ground here is because in Mario Sunshine, you use the flood attachment, I guess, to clean up stuff in the game. But it makes use of the analog trigger functionality of the GameCube controller. So basically, if you don't press the L or R button all the way down, you can, for one, you can walk around with Mario still, right? So you can kind of aim around. It lets you walk and shoot at the same time. So without the analog functionality, I'm pretty sure that you would not be able to do that. Now, as far as whether or not Mario Sunshine makes use of different degrees of the analog functionality, I'm not really sure. But it has to have some level of the analog trigger functionality to register the ability to walk around and aim like this. Now there is the digital functionality of the triggers. Basically, if you hold all the way down, you can have Mario stay in one position and then you can aim flood in the air or in any direction. And that's pretty critical for Mario Sunshine because you have to actually aim flood at certain enemies. I'm not really sure how critical it is to use the analog functionality, but it is helpful for doing things like cleaning off of this muck here. Okay, let's go ahead and switch over to one of the other controllers. I suppose we'll start with the 8BitDo mod kit. Now I want to mention that I will be using the GameCube mod kit with the retro receiver from 8BitDo. I think that's how you're going to have the best compatibility right now. I know you should be able to use something like Blue Retro to connect the mod kit to because the mod kit is Bluetooth, but I know that people have been having issues with certain functionality. So for the sake of this video, I'm going to be using exclusively the 8BitDo retro receiver to connect the mod kit to. I also wanted to mention that I am using the Switch mode of the mod kit and not the Android mode. Okay, let's go ahead and try to do the same tests here with the mod kit. So first of all, I noticed that the rumble is already working, which is nice. I'm able to use the analog trigger functionality, right? So I'm able to run around here with flood. Let's try the digital functionality. And if I hold the button all the way down, I'm able to aim flood around, which is nice. I do actually like the tension. It's almost the perfect amount of tension compared to a stock controller, at least my stock controller. So let's see if we can do the tiptoe test here. So just tiptoeing around here. Let's see how light we can do it. Yep, I think that's about the same lightness. And then, oh, get out of here, guy. And then if we go a little bit more, we can tiptoe a little bit more. It might be a little bit harder to control the amount of tiptoeiness that you can do, I suppose, with this controller because it doesn't have as much tension as the stock controller. But I don't think I'm really upset by that. It's actually easier to use. Now let's check where Mario starts to run full speed. Yeah, it's about the same. About halfway through the throw of the controller is where Mario starts running, and there's no benefit to going all the way to the edge of the stick box. Okay, let's go ahead and try out the Retro Fighters BattlerGC Pro. I've got the GameCube 2.4 gigahertz adapter that we unboxed, and all we have to do is hold down the home button, I guess, for it to pair. Looks like it's connected to something. Player 1 is connected here. I held down the home button and the Player 1 indicator is lit up, but it looks like the GameCube adapter is still blinking. Oh, I figured out why. The switch is in Bluetooth mode. I have to switch to 2.4 gigahertz mode on the back. Okay, almost immediately it paired, so that's a really good sign. Okay, nice. Okay, let's go ahead and hop into the game again. Right away I have Rumble. Rumble seems to work when I use Flood. It seems like the Rumble is stronger. I mean, I'm not sure if you can alter the strength of the Rumble on the 8BitDo controller, but the Rumble amount on this controller is kind of strong. I'm definitely able to use the analog trigger functionality, which is nice. I'm running around here with Flood, able to control where I'm aiming and run at the same time. And then if I hold Flood down, hold the trigger down, I can aim more precisely with Flood. I definitely don't hate the thumbstick. Like I said before, this is even easier to press than either the OEM controller or the 8BitDo Modkit. But it's nice. I mean, if I was gonna be gaming for a long time, I don't think I'd get fatigued or anything. That seems sort of silly to think about, but the stock thumbstick is kind of hard to press down over time. Okay, let's do the tiptoe test over here in the clearing. Okay, let's do the tiptoe test. How lightly do we have to press down? Okay, about the same. We're able to do the shallow tiptoe, I guess, or the like small tiptoeing, and then it slowly eases into more and more speed here. Let's see how far down. Oh, okay, it's about the same. It's about halfway through the thumbstick throw that we're able to run around, but I sort of noticed that it goes from tiptoeing kind of more quickly into running, which I don't really know if it makes a big difference in this game, but there might be some other games where you have to be super precise with how much you run or don't run or whatever with the thumbstick, so that could be a problem. But for something like Super Mario Sunshine, I don't think it's a problem. Oh, I'm also curious too. Let's see, what does the left Z button do? Oh, look at that, it's mapped to Z also, so that's kind of cool. What does the left, oh, it's like strafing. I didn't know what the left button or the left trigger did. I guess it's sort of like an enhanced right trigger, or like a, yeah, I guess you can you can aim and strafe around and stuff. So this might be good for like a boss fight or something. I didn't even know that the left trigger did anything. I guess the only complaint I have, other than the, the quickness that you go from tiptoeing to running here, is that the shoulder buttons are kind of loud. Not really in a disruptive way, but you might get bothered by that if you're gaming for a really long time, or if you're trying to be absolutely quiet and avoid having someone else hear you. It could be bothersome. For the next game to test with these controllers, I wanted to try an FPS game, and what better FPS game for the GameCube than Metroid Prime? I played all the way through the beginning using the OEM controller. Now I'm just going to play a little bit and kind of talk about things, starting with the OEM controller, just to give you my opinion about this for FPS games. So I guess my criteria for Metroid Prime here are: how smooth is the experience with the thumbstick, and does the analog trigger do anything? I actually did find out that the left trigger does do this kind of strafe mode. So when you're pressing left trigger more than halfway, there's like a specific spot where it engages, and then you could do strafing, which is good for like strafing around enemies and things. But I noticed that it doesn't do it right away, right? So there's a little bit of, maybe it engages about halfway down, then you could do the strafing. If you don't have it down far enough, it just, oh yeah, okay. I press it lightly, and now we're not doing strafing. If you do hold the left trigger all the way down to engage the digital button, it does it also, but it also is supposed to kind of engage a little bit with the analog stick. I know that's kind of a convoluted explanation, but I think that that's the only real use of the analog functionality in Metroid Prime. One thing that I noticed about the OEM controller is that the tension of the thumbstick is actually kind of detrimental. I think if you have a more worn-in controller, it probably won't be that bad, but since this controller is pretty new, yeah, it's pretty stiff still. We'll have to see how that compares to the other controllers when we use them. Okay, I think I have a good enough baseline with the stock controller. Let's go ahead and switch over to the 8BitDo Modkit. Okay, and it stays paired, which is kind of cool. You don't have to repair anything. All you have to do is hold start to turn the controller on. Now, I do have to say that I don't really notice the thumbstick being any better, really. I mean, it's fine. It just, I think maybe it has more to do with the speed that Samus turns here in Metroid rather than the tension of the controller. Now, as far as the analog trigger strafing thing, it's about the same depth, right? So I can hold it down about halfway and it can start strafing around, and still works with the digital push all the way down. So far, I can't really tell a noticeable difference between the stock controller here and the 8BitDo Modkit. Metroid Prime really isn't one of those fast-paced shooter games. It's more of a, I don't know, scenic game where you're supposed to explore and kind of take your time. Okay, now let's try the Retro Fighters BattlerGC Pro. This also pairs right away, which is nice. Okay, I actually like the minimal amount of pressure it takes to aim the thumbstick. At least for this game, it kind of pairs pretty well. Now, I wish there was just a look sensitivity option in the menu where you could just change how fast Samus looks around. But for whatever reason, the amount of pressure it takes to move this BattlerGC Pro, it actually kind of works well with this game. Now let's go ahead and try the strafing thing. Yeah, it's about halfway through the throw. Keep in mind that this BattlerGC Pro doesn't have the slide type triggers. They're more of traditional triggers. Finally, let's talk about the latency of each of these controllers and how they compare to the stock OEM controller. As a bonus, I've included the latency of Nintendo's Wavebird controller so you can see how modern aftermarket wireless controllers compare to Nintendo's 22-year-old wireless technology. I've used Lemonici's Mr. Lag testing setup to capture at least 2,000 samples from each of these controllers, and I've plotted the results of each controller as a box and whisker plot in this chart. You might be looking at these graphs and scratch your head, which I think is a pretty normal response. In a nutshell, for each controller, the blue box represents the middle 50% of all latency measurements that I captured. The black lines in the middle of each box represent the median latency number, which, if you've forgotten your middle school math, is the number in the middle of the entire list of latency measurements. The vertical lines, or whiskers, represent the top 25% and bottom 25% of measured latencies. For reference, the vertical grid marks are set to 16.67 millisecond increments, which is the number of milliseconds in one 60 FPS frame. Any red dots that you see are considered outliers, statistically outside of the expected ranges, and can be ignored. Okay, so what the heck does this all mean? Long story short, the 8BitDo Modkit is a little more consistent than the BattlerGC Pro. The middle 50% of samples are in a tight grouping close to 1 frame of latency, whereas the BattlerGC Pro tends to have a little higher latency, around 1.5 frames, and the latency is more variable in the lower range. This is a little bit shocking to me since the BattlerGC Pro is a 2.4 GHz controller when used with the included adapters. What's even more shocking is how good the Wavebird is. The latency measurements are very tightly grouped at about half a frame, which is almost as good as the OEM wired controller. If you want more information about how I created these latency captures, check out this video from Zez Retro. Are you an electronics hobbyist or creator looking to take your projects to the next level? PCBWay has you covered. Whether it's custom PCBs, 3D printing, CNC machining, or even injection molding, PCBWay offers everything you need to make your ideas come to life. But that's not all. With their PCB assembly services, they'll not only manufacture your custom PCB, but also source and solder all the components for you. Whether you're building your own project or an open source project, PCBWay makes it easy to create professional quality PCBs without breaking a sweat. I've been using PCBWay's assembly service for some time now, and it has drastically decreased the time it takes me to go from project idea to finished project. Visit PCBWay.com today and start bringing your next big project to life. Okay, here are my final thoughts. If you're a Melee player or you absolutely need a controller with the lowest input latency, you really aren't going to beat the OEM wired GameCube controller. But between the 8BitDo Modkit and the Retro Fighters BattlerGC Pro, let's break it down. The 8BitDo Modkit is a solid option if you want a controller that feels like the classic GameCube controller. One big advantage is that it comes with a replacement thumbstick and C-stick, which is good if the OEM controller you're using has stick damage. However, the replacement sticks have a smaller size hole and only work with the kit's new PCB. That means if they break, you won't be able to use standard OEM replacements. The 8BitDo option can also be more expensive than the BattlerGC Pro because you'll also need to buy the retro receiver and an OEM controller in addition to the mod kit. On top of that, the kit uses a proprietary charging cable, which can be an issue if it ever gets lost or broken. On the other hand, the Retro Fighters BattlerGC Pro is ready to go out of the box, no DIY required. It has a more modern, wider design that's great if you have larger hands, and it features dual Z buttons, which some people might prefer. However, the trigger click is loud, which might be distracting for some players, and while the sliding trigger functionality might not matter for everyone, it's a big downside if you're looking for an OEM replica. The controller's design is also a bit polarizing. Some might find it unattractive. So which one should you pick? If you love the nostalgia and feel of the original controller, the 8BitDo Mod Kit is a great way to modernize it. But if you're looking for something with more features and ease of use, the Retrofighter's BattlerGC Pro might be the better choice. I'm actually really curious to know your thoughts about these controllers. Have you already purchased one or the other? Let me know in the comments below. I'm trying to reach 10,000 subscribers here on YouTube, and you can help me do that by clicking the subscribe button. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.